This week's Torah portion feels a bit like a melodrama or a soap opera. Jacob, like his father and grandfather, have chosen a favorite from amongst their sons. He marks Joseph as the most beloved by gifting him a colorful tunic. And in the historic context of the fiber arts of the ancient Near East, this tunic would have been expensive. It likely was made with finer threads. It was dyed in bold colors, and it was striped, meaning the weaver had taken more time to change the colors. And by wearing it, Joseph would have stood out from his brothers' perhaps more common and homespun, plainer clothing. Jacob marks Joseph as royalty in the household. The tunic is described as katonet pasim, a phrase that is only used one other time in all of Tanakh, and it is to describe the dress of King David's daughter Tamar. So Jacob has quite literally put the clothing of royalty upon Joseph, perhaps even signifying a monetary price for his love. And understandably, Joseph's brothers are quite angry with their father's blatant show of favoritism and Joseph's behavior. Their younger brother does not exactly try to ingratiate himself to them. Instead, Joseph seems to play the role that Jacob has assigned him. Joseph is Jacob's eyes and ears as he brings bad reports about his brothers to his father, and Jacob sends him to go check up on them. Joseph shamelessly speaks of his dreams, in which the allegory of their sheaves bowing low, or the sun, moon, and surprisingly 11 stars, is quite clear and obvious. It is not surprising that his brothers dislike him. The family dynamics presented in this parsha actually feel quite realistic. Each member of the family has assumed their own role and mentally assigned a role to everyone else around them, a role that they expect each other to play. Jacob, the head of the household, is forthright about loving Joseph more than his brothers. Joseph accepts this role and expects his brothers to similarly treat him this way. It is hard to imagine that Joseph is completely oblivious to his brother's anger. The other brothers, each with their assigned responsibilities in the family, may feel forgotten or even unloved by their father, and they see Joseph as the cause of their troubles. Perhaps, after a while, it may even feel easy for them to play the role of jealous brothers, as nothing more seems to be expected of them. And many of us in our real lives would probably shy away from talking about the dynamics of our families, especially if they looked like this. We tend to stay back from sharing the complicated or more hurtful pieces of what happens in our homes. So the Torah comes along and asks us to confront the reality of how our family choices and roles impact one another. The Torah airs the proverbial dirty laundry of Jacob's family in order to ask us to examine our own lives. What roles do we find ourselves playing in our families? How are we expected to be bigger or smaller, to take on more or less responsibility? And what do we expect of others in return? These stories are not here by accident or merely because they make a compelling drama, but rather as an invitation into understanding ourselves more clearly. The parsha opens, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph was 17 years old and tended the flock." Usually when the Torah says these are the generations, it's followed by a genealogy listing the connections from one generation to another, connecting the stories of one major character, for example, Adam down to Noah, or Noah down to Abraham. But in this case, the sudden shift into the story of Joseph could tell us how Jacob sees himself and his legacy. Joseph's story is the one he cares about most. Joseph's life and troubles, which will eventually lead to the family's survival in Egypt, will become the defining story of this generation. In our previous chapters, Jacob received a new name, Israel. And this week, the text switches back and forth between calling him Jacob and calling him Israel. And it's worth noting, in the part that we read, that the moments when he is called Israel are these pivotal choices in the story. Verse 3 says, Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. And later, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing in Shechem. During all of Jacob and Joseph's interactions in this parsha, Jacob is referred to as Israel or as Aviv, as Joseph's father. And he is only called Jacob later on once the brothers tell him that Joseph has been killed. And perhaps this is a hint to how Joseph sees his father. He sees him as father, and he sees him as Israel, the leader of this family. He does not see Jacob, the young man who struggled with his own brother. He does not see Jacob, who was sent far away from home, who spent much of his young adulthood away from his family. Despite being the favorite, Joseph has not yet lived enough life to connect to his father's story, seeing him only as the figurehead of the family and budding nation. And perhaps this is why then, when Israel sends him to check on his brothers, his answer is Hineni. I am here. I am ready. We have previously seen Abraham answer Hineni to God, and Joseph's answer, particularly in this context of going alone to visit brothers who despise him, perhaps shows a similar deference to his father that Abraham might have felt towards God. This is heightened when he cannot find his brothers, and instead of returning home, he wanders in the fields and eventually takes the directions from a stranger to help him find his brothers. Joseph, it seems, desperately tries to fit himself into the role that his father has created for him. But I am choosing to read his choice to pursue his brothers to Dothan, as the stranger suggests, as an attempt to break from this mold. I believe this is the moment that he chooses to change up the expected roles and actually show his father how unhealthy their family dynamic has become. Joseph asks the man he encounters about his brother's whereabouts, and the man says, Nas'u mizeh, which literally means, they are gone from here. A commentator, Rashi, offers a different interpretation. Joseph says, where are my brothers? And the man says, they are gone from here. They have lost all sense of brotherhood with you. And Rashi continues, interpreting the name of the place, Dothan, not as the physical place Dothan, which is a real place, but rather as deyot, meaning legal pretexts. They are thinking about ways they can enact judgment on Joseph. In essence, according to Rashi, the man warns Joseph that his brothers have lost all sense of fraternity and are conspiring to harm him. And at this moment, according to this reading of the text, Joseph makes a choice. He goes to find these brothers. Perhaps he knows they will harm him. Perhaps he knows they plan to kill him. Or perhaps he thinks they will merely speak angry words to him again, and he can report it back to his father, how hated he has become in this family. The safe choice is to return home, to play the role of reporting younger brother, telling his father that his brothers simply were not shepherding where they said they would be. But instead, Joseph makes the decision to break this pattern of reporting back and to confront his brothers directly, and he walks straight into danger. If we look at this story simply as a metaphor and not a literal life and death situation as Joseph experiences it, Joseph's story illustrates the pain of breaking from family patterns. He stops hiding behind his father's favoritism. He approaches his brothers directly without pretense or dreams. And in breaking this pattern, he both loses and gains everything. He is sold into slavery. He will rise and fall and rise again in Egypt. And his life will be full of both hardship and triumph as he recreates himself away from these dynamics. He experiences the loss of family, but the Torah says there is hope because he is eventually reunited once everyone has had an opportunity to grow and learn. If we jump to the end of his story, Joseph will eventually forgive his brothers as he sees their actions as part of a divine plan. But to skip ahead, I think, would dishonor the pain that everyone goes through in these troubling moments. In real life, we don't get to skip ahead to the end of the story. We make decisions without guarantee they will lead to a brighter outcome. Confrontations with our own families are not promised to have an inspirational ending like Joseph and his brothers. And it can be frightening to stand in a moment of decision and choose to either keep going in the assigned roles we have found for ourselves, or to make a radical break from what has been and confront the problems that lie beneath the surface. Our tradition teaches there are no extra words in the Torah. Joseph's story will span this week and 3 more weeks of Torah readings, and we may ask, why spend so much time on this one family's internal drama? We could devote these columns of the Torah with straightforward ethical dictums or laws of how to treat our siblings and children and parents. Why show us this family in its messiest and painfulest moments? The Talmud teaches that the Torah speaks in human language. That is to say, the Torah teaches us through stories rooted in the human experience, using language, metaphors, allegories, and even stories that we can understand. The Torah is a guide for living life, and Judaism is far more than a collection of holidays and rituals. It is more than the thousands of pages of our law books or the proper way to blow the shofar. Living Jewishly means wrestling with and applying the values and ethics from our Torah to our everyday lives. Not just giving tzedakah, charity, but acting with tzedek, with justice and righteousness in our own families, and understanding that how we treat those closest to us in our workplaces, our friendships, our families, our communities reflects these values. And the Torah is a guide for living, and these stories show us people in moments of the heart, in moments where they must make the hardest possible choices. These moments that we experience when our values feel most challenged in the daily encounters of our lives, these are the moments we can look to our tradition, wrestle with these questions, and uncover wisdom that we can apply to our day-to-day lives. Shabbat Shalom.